There are moments in the courtroom when the air itself seems to hold its breath, when justice isn't just a ruling but a mirror held up to the human soul. That was the feeling on a quiet Thursday morning as a young woman stepped through the courtroom doors wearing a $3,000 dress, a Louis Vuitton bag resting casually on her arm, and a confidence untouched by consequence. Behind her, an elderly woman was pushed forward in a wheelchair. Her hospital gown hung loosely on her small frame. Her silver hair was uncombed. Her eyes moved slowly, searching for something familiar in a room that felt too big, too bright, too unforgiving. This was Dorothy Whitmore, 74 years old, frightened, confused, and unaware of the storm she had been pulled into. And just a few steps ahead stood her daughter Madison, scrolling through her phone as if this were a meeting she could reschedule a slight inconvenience in an otherwise polished life. What breaks a bond that once held a family together? What turns a daughter into a stranger and a mother into a burden? And in a world where greed speaks loudly, who will protect those whose voices have grown soft? Judge Frank Caprio watched the scene unfold with a heaviness only years of experience can give. He could sense it, the quiet tragedy beneath the surface, the kind that doesn't announce itself with shouting, but with silence. Before we go any deeper into this story, if you believe every parent deserves dignity and every elder deserves protection, take a moment to subscribe. These stories matter because the people in them matter. And sometimes the only thing standing between vulnerability and injustice is someone willing to pay attention. The first signs of heartbreak often arrive quietly long before anyone realizes a tragedy has begun. For Dorothy Whitmore, it started in the small, gentle moments of forgetting, misplacing her reading glasses, losing track of a recipe she had cooked for 40 years, pausing mid-sentence as if waiting for a memory to find its way back home. Her world was softening around the edges, not collapsing, just changing shape in ways that frightened her more than she ever admitted. And in that fragile space, trust became everything. Madison stepped into that space, wearing the confidence of someone who believed she understood the world better than the woman who raised her. She arrived with legal papers, financial statements, and warnings about scammers and dangerous mistakes. She spoke with authority, the kind that doesn't invite questions. Dorothy listened because she wanted to believe her daughter was helping her. She signed where Madison pointed because love teaches us to trust, even when we don't fully understand what we are giving away. But beneath the surface of those signatures, something darker was taking shape, something Dorothy could not see, and Madison never acknowledged. The family home had stood for 52 years, holding memories in every room. The scent of Sunday dinners, the laughter of children, the workshop her husband built before cancer stole him away. Yet Madison described it all as an asset, a problem to be handled quickly before taxes or medical bills overwhelmed her mother. She spoke of leaks, of repairs, of looming financial danger. Her words sounded urgent, responsible, even loving. Dorothy, worried about being a burden, agreed to do what she was told was best. But the truth was quieter and far more unsettling. The house was valued at nearly $500,000. Still, Madison sold it to her own company for a fraction of that $320,000. On paper, it was a family matter. In reality, it was the moment love and loyalty began to bend under the weight of greed. Dorothy never saw the checks, never understood the paperwork, never imagined that the roof over her memories had become fuel for her daughter's business expansion. What she understood was simple. Madison said it had to be this way, and Dorothy trusted her. Then came the nursing home. Not introduced with tenderness or patience, but with urgency, words like unsafe, declining, necessary. Madison insisted her mother could no longer cook without risk, could no longer manage her medications, could no longer live alone without inviting disaster. She painted pictures of danger, of isolation, of a future Dorothy couldn't handle. Dorothy, frightened and confused, believed her. She packed a small suitcase. She left her garden behind. She entered Sunset Manor thinking it was temporary, just until things made sense again. But Madison had already decided it was permanent. The emotional distance grew as fast as the legal one. Madison stopped asking about her mother's routines, her comfort, her wishes. She focused on numbers, care costs, monthly payments, investment opportunities. She built a life of luxury outside the walls of Sunset Manor, convinced she had done nothing wrong. After all, she told herself, this was responsible planning. Yet every night, Dorothy stared at the unfamiliar ceiling above her hospital bed and whispered the same quiet question into the dark. Why can't I go home? This was the world Judge Frank Caprio stepped into, a world where a daughter's ambition had quietly overtaken a mother's dignity. A world where signatures carried the weight of betrayal. A world where the lines between protection and exploitation had blurred so deeply that only a courtroom could untangle them. And as the case unfolded, one truth became devastatingly clear. The harm had begun long before Madison ever set foot in the courtroom. The first moments inside a courtroom often reveal more truth than hours of testimony. That truth arrived the instant Madison Whitmore sat down at the defendant's table, crossing her legs, adjusting her designer dress, lifting her phone as if the world outside mattered far more than the woman who had given her life. She didn't look toward Dorothy, not once. Not even when her mother's wheelchair softly scraped the floor as it was positioned behind her. Judge Frank Caprio noticed. Everyone noticed. He began with calm authority, the kind that tells you he already sees through the performance. Ms. Whitmore, he said, you're facing charges of financially exploiting your mother. How do you respond? Madison didn't pause. She didn't breathe. Her answer was rehearsed, polished, almost corporate. This is a family financial management situation, Your Honor. My mother has dementia. I acted only to protect her from scammers and unsafe decisions. A murmur rippled through the gallery, low, disbelieving, almost sorrowful. Dorothy leaned forward, her voice soft and trembling. Madison, sweetheart. Why am I here? I want to go home. My roses need watering. But the daughter did not turn, not even at the sound of her mother's confusion. Mom, she said sharply, the house is gone. We talked about this. You're safer where you are. Her tone wasn't protective. It was dismissive, cold in a way that made several elderly spectators shake their heads. Judge Caprio shifted his attention to the case file pages thick with financial documents, witness statements, and transaction records. He read quietly, thoughtfully, but each page seemed to weigh heavier than the last. Finally, he looked up. Ms. Whitmore, records indicate you sold your mother's home for $320,000. Yet it was appraised at $485,000 just months earlier. Can you explain the discrepancy? Madison straightened, ready with another polished answer. The house needed major repairs, foundational issues, outdated utilities. I secured the best price possible. But the buyer, Caprio continued calmly, was your own company. A crack appeared in Madison's confidence, small, fleeting, but unmistakable. I offered her full value, but she preferred to keep the home in the family. Madison insisted. It was her decision. Dorothy shook her head slowly, her eyes brimming. I didn't want to sell anything. She told me. She said if I didn't sign right away, the family would go bankrupt. The room fell silent, thick with the weight of betrayal. Caprio leaned forward. Ms. Whitmore, your mother says she signed under fear. Do you dispute that? Madison's answer came too fast. She was confused that day, Your Honor. Her dementia was progressing. She didn't understand the financial risks. Caprio's next question cut through the room like a blade. Then how, he asked carefully, was she competent enough to sign complex legal documents transferring nearly $500,000 of property? For the first time, Madison had no immediate answer. The questioning deepened. Madison insisted Dorothy couldn't cook anymore. Dorothy insisted she cooked every day. Madison claimed unpaid taxes threatened foreclosure. Caprio held up official records showing every payment up to date. Madison said medical bills were overwhelming. The bank statements showed over $100,000 in savings. Every explanation twisted, every justification frayed. Every thread she tried to hold on to slipped through her fingers. And then Caprio asked the question that changed the entire atmosphere of the courtroom. Ms. Whitmore, what was the monthly cost of the nursing home you placed your mother in? $6,000, Madison said proudly, as if listing a luxury amenity. And how is it paid? From the proceeds of the house sale, obviously. Caprio paused long enough for the room to feel the shift. At that rate, he said quietly, your mother's life savings will be gone in 4.5 years. What happens then? Madison blinked. We'll figure it out. Maybe Medicaid. It's what people do. The judge set his papers down. And you believe, he asked slowly, that draining your mother's assets unnecessarily, then shifting her care onto taxpayers, is responsible? Madison opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since walking into the courtroom, she looked uncertain. For the first time, she glanced briefly, reluctantly toward her mother. And in that brief glance, the full weight of what she had done stood exposed for everyone to see. In every courtroom drama, there comes a moment when truth refuses to hide any longer. For Madison Whitmore, that moment arrived the instant Dr. Sarah Martinez took the stand. The courtroom, tense for hours with arguments and whispers, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, heavier. The doctor's presence carried authority, not just medical, but moral. She looked at Dorothy, then at Madison, and spoke with a clarity that cut through layers of excuses. "Your Honor," Dr. Martinez began, her voice steady. "Mrs. Whitmore retains sufficient cognitive function for independent living. She requires minimal daily support, perhaps 2 to 3 hours for medication and household assistance. Institutional care is premature." The courtroom gasped. Madison's carefully constructed fortress of logic and legality began to crumble. Every excuse, every justification, every carefully rehearsed line now collided with one undeniable fact: Dorothy did not need to be in a nursing home. Dorothy's eyes lifted, glimmering with renewed hope. "I can manage at home," she whispered, her voice gaining strength. "I've cooked, tended my garden, cared for myself. I am not ready to leave my life behind." Madison's response was defensive, rapid, almost panicked. "Your Honor, full supervision is required. Home care is unreliable. I have business obligations. My mother's safety." Caprio held up a hand, halting her mid-argument. "The evidence, Ms. Whitmore, shows otherwise. Your mother could live independently. She never requested institutional care. And yet you made this decision primarily for your convenience and financial gain." A silence swept the courtroom. The weight of Caprio's words hung in the air. Madison swallowed, realizing the trap she had laid for herself. She had acted under the guise of responsibility while reaping a personal profit from the house sale. The $165,000 gained, the luxurious lifestyle, the business expansion, all now cast a shadow over her moral character. Caprio's questioning dug deeper into the finances. "Your business recently received $300,000 in investments," he said carefully, "some of which originated from your mother's property sale. Can you confirm?" Madison hesitated, then admitted, "Yes, part of it may have come from that transaction." Dorothy's face crumpled. Her trust, once unshakable, was fractured. "Madison, why is money more important than me?" Madison's words stumbled, revealing cold truth. "It's not just about care. It's about managing assets, family security, and my business growth. Love does not pay medical bills." The courtroom felt the moral chasm widening. Madison had unintentionally exposed the full extent of her exploitation: misuse of POA for personal business gain, selling a family home below market value, placing her mother in unnecessary institutional care, profiting while her mother's autonomy and dignity were ignored. Caprio turned to Dorothy, speaking with the quiet authority of a grandfather and a judge. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you had the choice, where would you want to live?" "I want my home, my garden, my roses, my neighbor Mrs. Chen. I want my life," Dorothy answered, her voice steady despite the tears. The shift was undeniable. The focus moved from Madison's justifications to Dorothy's rights, her dignity, and her wishes. The case was no longer about technical legality. It was about justice, morality, and the restoration of trust. In every courtroom, there comes a moment when silence speaks louder than words. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. The evidence was clear. The testimonies had revealed every misstep, every deceit, every act of cold ambition that had placed Dorothy Whitmore in unnecessary danger. Madison's carefully constructed facade of responsibility had crumbled completely. "Ms. Whitmore," Caprio began, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of decades of wisdom, "you have systematically exploited your mother's trust. You sold her property below market value for personal gain. You placed her in costly institutional care she does not require. And in doing so, you violated the sacred bond between a parent and a child." Madison's face drained of color. Her rehearsed words faltered. The courtroom felt the full gravity of the betrayal. This was not merely a legal violation, it was a moral one. Caprio continued, outlining the remedial measures to restore justice. Dorothy's sale of her home was voided, restoring her ownership with clear title. She would be removed from Sunset Manor immediately and provided temporary housing while social services arranged appropriate home care. Madison would reimburse all nursing home costs already paid, $36,000. For the first time, an independent guardian would oversee Dorothy's financial affairs until Madison proved capable of acting in her mother's best interest. Madison was also ordered to attend weekly eldercare counseling, a mandate to understand the depth of her legal and moral responsibilities. The judge's words were firm, deliberate, and compassionate. He emphasized not punishment for its own sake, but restoration of dignity, trust, and family bonds. Dorothy's eyes glistened with tears, but there was relief. I just wanted to stay in my home with my roses and my memories of Robert. I never wanted to be a burden, she whispered softly. The courtroom, silent for hours, seemed to exhale collectively. The pain, confusion, and fear that had clouded her days began to lift, replaced by a sense of rightful restoration. Madison, humbled and shaken, finally understood the consequences of her choices. For the first time, she looked at her mother not as an asset or a project, but as a human being deserving of respect, love, and autonomy. Her luxury, her ambition, and her convenience could no longer justify harm. Judge Caprio closed the session with a lesson far greater than the legal verdict. When family love is sacrificed for financial gain, justice must restore both dignity and trust. Parents leave more than money to their children. They leave an expectation that their care and protection will be honored. Elder abuse, especially within families, represents one of society's most heartbreaking betrayals. But it is never too late for accountability, reflection, and the chance to rebuild what was lost. The courtroom, though heavy with tension, felt a quiet sense of moral triumph. Justice had been served not only by the letter of the law, but by the clarity of conscience, the restoration of a mother's home, and the redemption offered to a daughter willing to learn. The final moments of this courtroom story were quiet yet powerful. Dorothy Whitmore returned to her home, the familiar scent of roses and earth, greeting her like a long-lost friend. The sun glinted off her silver hair as she tended her garden fingers, brushing petals she had feared she'd never see again. Every corner of the house echoed memories, laughter, and love, reminders that justice had restored what greed had nearly taken away. Madison Whitmore entered this space differently. No longer the confident, untouchable young woman in designer dresses, she walked slowly, humbly, with a quiet awareness of her mother's pain. Each visit became a lesson, not just in caregiving, but in understanding responsibility and the human cost of ambition. She offered help with meals, asked questions about her mother's day, and listened, truly listened for the first time in years. The walls that once separated them began to fade, replaced by tentative bridges of trust and shared history. Justice, as Judge Caprio demonstrated, is not only punitive, it is restorative. It seeks to heal wounds inflicted by selfishness and to teach lessons that endure far beyond legal documents or financial restitution. Through careful guidance and compassionate authority, Caprio ensured Dorothy's dignity was protected, Madison's missteps were confronted, and the family had a path forward. The message was clear: love, care, and responsibility cannot be replaced by money, power, or convenience. And for the audience, there is a call beyond the courtroom walls. Reflect on your own families, your own priorities. Who might need your attention before it is too late? Are there elders in your life whose voices go unheard? Share this story with someone who needs to see that justice can coexist with compassion, and that accountability can open doors to redemption. Subscribe to learn more stories where truth, integrity, and humanity prevail even when greed and ambition threaten to overshadow love. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is not in punishing, but in holding space for growth, forgiveness, and understanding. As Dorothy tends her roses and Madison walks beside her in humility, the audience witnesses more than a legal victory. They witness the restoration of trust, the healing of hearts, and the enduring legacy of family love.